So on Wednesday at about 12:15, I got my first migraine ever. And it was not the typical sort of like crushing headache. Instead, it presented as losing the center of my field of vision, which is a little bit terrifying. So I went to the emergency room, took all the exams that they had me take, which included a CT scan and an MRI scan, blood work, everything. And they said, not a stroke, nothing, you didn't have an aneurysm, nothing like that. What happened was a migraine, just probably, but go see an ophthalmologist just to make sure. And I went to the ophthalmologist Thursday, just to make sure I wasn't on the verge of losing my eyes. And they said what I expected. It was just like, no, it was a migraine. Everything's fine from the front of the eye to the optic nerve, and everything in between looked okay. So I spent Wednesday in the ER and Thursday being deliberately blinded by the dilation process. So fun times. Put me a couple days behind. I apologize that meant we missed class. I apologize that means that I'm still further behind on grading. I was hoping at least to get started on the essay grading this week. And to be honest, I've not. I'm still not even there this last week. And so this week, hopefully I'll get some of that done. My next task, however, is getting the midterm posted. My hope is to do so today. I have so much booked today, so I'm going to try really hard to get to that at least by the evening. The exam will be open book and open note. It will include the contents of the lecture today. So if there's anything you don't understand, please make sure you ask follow-up questions. One of the reasons I decided to design my own exam is so that I could test you on the stuff I'm talking about in addition to the stuff that's in the book. So there is stuff in the book in the exam that's only from the lectures, that's not from the book. So if there's anything from the lectures that's not clear to you, do ask me. You will only get one try at the exam, so make sure you feel like you understand everything before you start the exam, even though it is open book and open note. Trying to learn those materials for the first time with the exam open in a tab is terrifying. I don't recommend it. And it's going to go a lot better for you if you already pretty much have a good mastery of the materials. It is not a collective endeavor. Do your own exam by yourself. Do not consult your classmates. Do not consult people who've taken this class before about it. It's a business ethics class. I expect you to behave ethically. That includes doing your own work. But it is open book and it is not timed. It should take most of you about 60 to 90 minutes. It's not going to be, my intention is not to be that brutal, but it is going to be a little bit more challenging than you're used to for some of the stuff, in particular, the multiple choice questions, the quizzes, and I also took a look at the test bank that Cengage offers for the textbook, and it's all just basic level, sort of like first level on Bloom's taxonomy of like basically, did you read the chapter? And I'm not so interested in that so much as like, did you master the materials and can you apply them to a new context? And so I'm hoping that you can apply that to a new context. I'm going to give you all of my multiple choice questions are going to be a new context where you'll have to take that knowledge and apply it somewhere else. So like, for example, today we're going to talk about Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. So the type of question I might ask about that is to give you 4 statements, which may even be about totally different topics, and say which of these 4 statements is most clearly guided by something similar to Kant's categorical imperative. And so not just being able to regurgitate the definition of what Kant said about the categorical imperative. I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to test you on that. Instead, I want to say, knowing that, assuming that you know that, let's ask you about a higher level of knowledge. Can you apply that and can you use that in a novel context? That's how I write multiple choice questions. It makes them harder. It does make them more challenging. I think you're all up to the task. I look forward to seeing you all do pretty well on the exam, but be prepared for that. Don't be thrown off when you get some harder multiple choice questions. There will also be short answer and long answer questions. I'll look for the directions on that. I will post the directions for the exam in the announcement about the exam when the exam is live. And so make sure you read that and make sure you understand what you're getting in for before you click on the exam to start it, because you only get one try with the exam. So you want to make sure you're ready to take it, that you understand what it is that you're doing, and that you're ready to sit down and take the full thing. Because if you click on the exam to start taking it and figure out what's in the exam, then that's your attempt. And so you'd better be ready. And so don't count on that. I'll put the instructions in the announcement. Look for the announcement, and then that'll be how you learn what it is that you're expecting in the exam. That's a
Um,
lot. Any
so
questions?
I just came in. So do we have an exam coming up soon?
Yes, yes. I will post. So I will, my goal is to post it today. Whenever I post it, you will have the rest of that day that I post it, plus 7 full days, midnight to midnight.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So you'll have a week. You'll have a whole week to take the exam.
And it's related to which chapter?
Chapters 1 through 6.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
And as far as study aids is concerned, are we just following the PowerPoint as a guide, or what should we use to kind of frame our study time?
If you have followed along in class and looked at the PowerPoints, and when I said this is in the exam, this is in the book, go read that, you'll be exceptionally well prepared for the exam. I've told you in class what it is that I'm going to test you on. I'm sorry I didn't have time to prepare a study guide for you. Because it's open book, I'm not real broken up about it. I know I said I'd prepare a study guide. I didn't prepare a study guide. I apologize for that. But if there's something where it's like, oh wait, what is that term or what does that mean? Then because I shouldn't have promised a study guide because it's open book, open note. You shouldn't need that. You should if you go through and review their PowerPoints, certainly flip back through the textbook and sort of look at what the textbook really emphasizes as well. But I at least said what I said to read in the book might not be sort of explicitly laid out in the slides, but I did at least try to say like this is in the exam in the book. You can go read that there, and so that stuff is also legitimate stuff. But what I chose to emphasize in class is a pretty fair representation of what it is that I'm going to try to emphasize. So if there's a whole section of the book that I didn't cover and I ask you about the broad brush strokes of that section of the book, I think that's pretty fair game. I will not ask you about the minutia of the various regulatory acts that they spent 2 paragraphs talking about. I don't write those kinds of exams, that sort of thing.
So questions more based on like a scenario or an example, and then being able to identify what concept is present in that.
Stuff like that. Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
That's right. Okay, well, we about ready here to get started on a lecture. Lots of fun stuff to cover. So share screen, desktop 2. All right, so today we're going to talk about moral philosophy. And many of you may be thinking, and I hope several of you are affirmatively thinking, hey, wait a minute, you said that this class was about ethics and not morality, and that morality is individual, and we're more interested in ethics, which is bigger than the individual, is more about the industry and the company and that stuff. And I will recap that difference, and I'll also explain why I'm doing those things, why I'm covering this in this. In other words, the first thing I'm going to talk about is to give you the context to understand, hey, I thought you said we're studying ethics, not morality. I'll explain why I'm doing this lecture today. Then I want to talk about where does morality come from. This is a bit of a hint. I'm going to try to go back to prehistory and talk about one of the coolest books that's come out in the whole century, in my view, and talk some about where a couple of the coolest books that have come out in the century, and then talk about some of where that comes into what we're talking about. And then I have some examples of moral philosophy. This is where I'll try to go through the ones from the textbook that I think are especially important. I will explicitly do so because I want to make sure that you at least sort of have another chance to try to understand this stuff. But the textbook does cover these as well. So I will go kind of quickly through these. Okay. So first, Professor Herman, I thought you said we're studying ethics, not morality. So why are you bringing moral philosophy into this? And it's not just because chapter 6 covers moral philosophy. I think it's important. First, though, let's do a quick refresher on what I mean by morality versus ethics. When we talk about morality, we mean the individual person as they're living their public and private life. Whereas by ethics, we mean an individual as a member of a profession. For morality, we're talking about the relevant group as your family and your groups of private associates. Right. So who do you spend time with outside of work? That's your most important peer group, especially your family as you're growing up. That tends to be where you're going to learn your morality from. We'll talk about that briefly. Whereas when you talk about professional ethics, your relevant group is your profession, your division, your company, your industry, also your country, right? Even your region can have, in a country as big as the US, your region can have different understandings of what ethics mean, or your state might have different ethical guidelines for a given profession that kind of seep into the industry. Generally accepted accounting practices is one example here. So you could do things the way that they do them in Europe. You could do them the way that they're done here. Both are valid, but wherever you are, do them that way, because that's how you avoid confusion. And you don't pick and choose and say, well, I want to do it this way, this way, this way, this way, except this, if I do it the European way for this particular calculation, that makes us look a little better. Like, no, that's not. That's not the ethical way to behave, right? But it's not because the European model of accounting is bad. It's not wrong or backwards. It's just that that's not what we're expecting here. And so you're creating confusion and an opportunity for strategic misunderstanding. Morality largely starts from the religious or family upbringing. And I do note here that it can change. I didn't have that can change part in the previous class. And somebody said, hey, but wait, I grew up really religious conservative and I don't believe any of that stuff anymore. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That absolutely can change, right? You think about a really drastic example is the tradition in Amish communities of Ramspringa, right? Where it's like 15 or 17, it's roughly bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah age, or no, a little older than that, but quinceanera, or a little older, but sort of, it's one of these, a lot of cultures have these sort of like formal introductions into adulthood. Well, in Amish society, it's they send you out into the world and say, go discover what it's like out there. Go, drink, try drugs if you want, have sex if you want, like whatever you want to do, go figure out if that's the way you want to live outside of the sort of the cultural and religious and moral boundaries that are very strictly set up in our society. And then most of those students come back, and most of those kids come back, but if some of them don't, some of them stay out, they're like, I don't like that Amish thing. I like this, Times Square is pretty interesting. I think I'm going to stay here and hang out. And so you can have really dramatic opportunities for changes in your life here. So it's not that your family or religious upbringing forces you or demands that you come out a certain way once you're an adult and can leave and go do your own thing. But for the most part, for most people, the majority of your morality will come from your upbringing. And if you're honest with yourself about that and do the self-introspection to figure out where that stuff comes from, it's going to be from your family of origin typically, and any religious upbringing that was part of that. And hopefully in a professional context, this is going to be based more in an explicit discussion by the group. Hopefully your company is having these conversations. Hopefully your industry is having these conversations. Hopefully your professional licensing boards are making you have these conversations. But just because it's not explicit or not explicitly tied to a statement of values doesn't mean that it's not having an effect. I mean, if you go to a company where bullying is the norm, right? The HR can make you watch all the anti-bullying video trainings that they want, right? But if as soon as the video training is over, everyone just goes back to bullying the heck out of each other, then bullying is the norm, is the ethical value of that company, is one of the ethical values of that company. So it can be implicit, it can just be part of baked into the culture without it being part of an explicit discussion. And good things too. I mean, good parts of ethical culture happen accidentally as well. Morality shapes who you are, kind of period, in like a global sense, but especially like in your personal life. Whereas professional ethics is more about who we are. What is normal and acceptable for car sales? What is normal and acceptable for accounting? What is normal and acceptable in the College of Business at MSU Denver, right? Whatever the relevant professional context is, you're answering the question who we are as an industry, as a company, as a division, as a profession. The question for morality I like to ask is, how can you sleep at night, right? And that phrased exactly that way often implies like you are doing something so incredibly wrong. I don't know how you can sleep at night, right? But that's literally a question I think as adults we all have to be able to ask is, am I comfortable with the way that I behave today, such that when my head hits the pillow, I can sleep well? Or have I wronged some people or done some questionable behavior that it's going to get caught in my craw a little bit, and I'm going to have some trouble sleeping? Obviously, this is not a concern that absolutely everyone has. There are some people who just don't care. People with antisocial personality disorder in particular come to mind. Antisocial personality disorder, for those of you who aren't deep in the diagnostical and statistical manual of psychologists, is that's the technical term for a sociopath. They don't care. They don't care. They literally have no guilt, no shame, no worries about what other people think about them, which is not to be confused with narcissists who care very deeply about what other people think about them. They have no sort of intrinsic moral compass. And so therefore, if they do somebody wrong, they have no trouble sleeping that night. That's not a common personality trait. That's something like 1% or less of the population. So most people do have to be able to answer this question: is how am I going to sleep at night? In contrast, when it comes to ethics, it's going to be more about how do people know who we are? Who are we as viewed through the eyes of other people? Who are we in terms of the way that we treat our stakeholders? Who are we in terms of our the way that we treat the world at large? And how do people know that? How do people what sort of reputation or feeling do we have in the community? And I oversimplified this a little bit last time by saying it's between you and God. It's between you and God. And that's a fair way to put it, but it's much more about like between you and your friends, between you and your family, between you and your God or goddess or gods or goddesses of your understanding, between you and the community, all of those deeply personal relationships. That's really more where morality lives. And that's why when we're talking about sex in particular, we're really talking about a very personal relationship. Hopefully that's not, don't bring that to work, please leave that at home. Because then you've also got ethical concerns. But so that's a really attention grabbing example of what I mean by that. In contrast, professional ethics are between you and your firm, between you and your profession, between your firm and the profession, between other members of the profession, between your firm or your division and the various stakeholders that you run into. Okay, Professor Herman, I get it. You're saying you're asking me, fine, whatever. But why? Once again, how does this get us to caring about individual morality in the context of a class about professional ethics, right? This gentleman and his activity, this is not what we're talking about in this class for the most part. Absolutely. And I told you that explicitly. So why am I bringing it back in? Why does, I learned it in the Torah as a kid and I've continued that tradition through my life. Like, why is that relevant to a class like this? And it's because we all bring this stuff to the office. We all bring this stuff to the office like luggage, like baggage. It's now, I like the connotation of the word baggage, right? Like when you go into a new relationship, when you move in with a new roommate, you bring baggage. You bring baggage, and that baggage is your all of your past learning about how people treat each other, all of your past behaviors, all of the ways that other people treated you in the past. You bring all of that stuff with you into every important relationship that you enter, right? So just like you bring that baggage into a new romantic relationship, you bring that baggage with you to work. You bring your moral fiber or lack of fiber. You bring your understandings about right and wrong. You bring that with you to work the same way you bring that baggage with you into a romantic relationship or a new living relationship. But I want you to think about bringing baggage to work in a literal sense, because I want to continue the metaphor. Imagine a place with a huge sales team, There are sales staff that are just dozens and dozens of people, and they all travel. The expectation is that the whole sales team travels all the time. And a lot of times you travel in the middle of the day. You don't always get the luxury of going straight from home to the airport. Sometimes you have a 4 o'clock flight. You leave from the office at 1 in the afternoon. And to make that work, you've got to literally bring your baggage with you to the office before you, and then it's going to be with you at work until 1 o'clock when you leave to catch your flight. Do you want that baggage safely tucked away in each salesperson's office? Do you maybe set up a separate closet, right? There's a locked closet and with the combo that changes, and only the people who are traveling that day store their luggage in there real quick, and then they take off with it? Or do you want this baggage hanging out in the hallway where everyone can trip over it? Obviously, you got to get this baggage out of the hallway. You want the baggage in a literal sense. I mean, like I always literally think, I mean, one of the first and foremost things I think about with business ethics is just safety at the workplace, right? So in a literal sense, any situation like this, if you ever work in a place like this where people are just leaving tripping hazards everywhere, please intervene for your own sake and for the sake of your colleagues. Like safety is important. But in a metaphorical sense, I want you to think about, how do we get the moral baggage of our highly personalized individual upbringings that you might not bring and you might not bring to the office? How do I get my baggage out of the veritable hallway, out of the metaphorical hallway? And the answer is to have enough of an understanding of what morality is, where morality comes from, and how that might trip various people up, including yourself, but also including other people, to be able, how do you understand that well enough to be able to have an explicit discussion about, hey, that's really more like an individual moral sort of paradigm. And then for you or for the people that you're working with, redirect that into saying, okay, that can inform the ethical discussion, but we really got to live over here where people who didn't have your upbringing are going to agree with the decisions that are being made. Right. And so the reason we understand morality is so that we can take that, so that we can identify that baggage, put it in our veritable office, get it out of the hallway, and then clear the hallway so that we can have the discussion around what ethical norms is the company comfortable with, what ethical norms is the division, the industry, and the country comfortable with. That's why we're doing this, is just so we can recognize it and put it out of the way and get back to the discussion that we're having with the rest of the semester. So where does morality come from? I mean, there's like a million answers to this question. It's not an easy question. It's a really interesting question. And psychologists and business ethicists and philosophers and other intellectuals and just other people have been struggling with this question for centuries. And so I don't claim to have the definitive answer, but I think I have a pretty good answer by way of explaining and clarifying it that at least can help us think through some of what morality really is. Can help us think through some of what morality really is. And it comes back to a lot of the stuff, and it's gonna, I hope it resonates with a lot of you by way of explaining sort of what that means to you, what it has meant in your life, and what it has meant to the other people in your life, because I think it's important to recognize some of the history of where this stuff comes from. And if you want to talk about history, one of the most important books of the 21st century is a book called Sapiens: A Previous History of Humankind, A Brief History of Humankind, by a gentleman named Yuval Noah Harari. Now, Harari it just literally starts at the beginning of the Big Bang, and then the beginning of life, and then very quickly has us at the point where, okay, we are just these uninteresting apes along a bunch of other uninteresting apes in Africa. Okay, great. But then we start to differentiate ourselves. How does that happen? And that's really where the story starts to take off. And one of the first places that story starts to take off, where we start to differentiate ourselves from other apes, who, by the way, almost to a species, are either stronger or faster or more nimble than us or more agile than us, right? Like you would never want to pick a fight with an orangutan or a gorilla. They would destroy you, right? So like, how do we win this fight if we're so much weaker and slower than all these other species? One of the very first places we start to differentiate ourselves in terms of gaining a comparative advantage is through language. And we have, as you know, we have, it's not that other animals can't communicate at all. I mean, they have language or a language of sorts in lots of species, right? Like dogs have different barks and they kind of can identify the different barks. You know, one bark means hi, one bark means I'm going to murder you, right? And they can tell the difference. Other apes as well have words for there's a lion. Look out, there's a lion. Everyone in the trees, here's a lion. Right. So the word for lion, in some sense, at least like big predator, like look out, the danger, right? There's some word for that exists in a lot of other species. We're not the only species that has something like a word for this animal. So, other apes, monkeys can say, and apes are not monkeys, do not. I mean, like if you call a gorilla a monkey, I'm not going to correct you, but no, please know the difference. But the other primates will have a word typically for the predators in their area. And then the other members of the group can respond accordingly, right? And so that's like a base level of like there's a word for this thing, right? But then think about this in terms of levels of abstraction. The next level up in abstraction, though, tells us things about this predator. And that right there is already where we really start to differentiate ourselves with language, right? So like a macaque can say, I forget even where they lived, but like a macaque can say like there's danger or there's lion, right? But we can say I saw a lion by the river last week, but I haven't seen a lion all week. That's important information, right? There were more lions here this year than there were last year. That's important information, right? I saw 12 lions. I saw 3 lions, but 2 of them were cubs. And so watch out for mama, because when the cubs are around, mama gets real defensive. Right. So that next level of abstraction that can say things, not just like identify something, but say some meaningful things about the things that you're identifying, that next level of abstraction really starts to be able to differentiate us, because then that's how we start doing more sophisticated things, right? Like even at the zoo, apes sometimes will make tools. They'll grab, if you put food just out of their reach, they'll start looking around the cage for like, what can I do to reach up and grab the food to bring it back into my reach, right? So like making it, using something as a tool, or even changing it a little bit to make a tool out of it, is something that other apes have been observed doing. But we make tools to make tools. Right. And so that gives us, that's how we started being able to develop spears, and then spears with levers that can fling them even further, and then bows and arrows to move our spears even faster. So that next level of abstraction allows us to do things like agriculture, like more sophisticated tool development, like the kinds of things that really allowed us to grow and flourish a lot better than our primate competitors. But Harari argues that this isn't even the most important step in levels of abstraction of language. Harari argues that it's the next step up from that, right? So like lots of primates have lion. We have, I saw the lion last week, but Harari argues that the most important one is up here, which would be something like the lion is the god of my tribe. The lion is the god of my tribe. My tribe worships the lion. Right. And why does he say that? Why does he say that? It's because he identifies what he calls the social utility of these higher principles, of these higher levels of abstraction. Right. What is the social value? What do we get from that as a group of people by being able to bring the abstraction up to the level of gods? Right. And it's because what we would identify as, so in the textbook, it talks about, I won't ask you in detail about Kohlberg's 6-stage model of cognitive development, cognitive moral development, but do read through it. I think it's certainly worth getting a quick skim of. It is not good social science. It is not a highly validated, widely respected theory. So don't read it too seriously. Don't take it that seriously. But in terms of like at the base level, there's so our textbook authors, Kohlberg identifies 6 levels, and our textbook authors identify 3. And so I'll run through this really quick. At the first level, a person is concerned with his or her own immediate interests and with external rewards and punishments. At the second level, an individual equates right with conformity to the expectations of good behavior of the larger society or some other significant reference group. Finally, at the third or principled level, an individual sees beyond the norms, laws, and authority of groups or individuals. Employees at this level make ethical business decisions regardless of negative external pressures. I think it's really oversimplified to do that way. But I mean, like, think about the step from as we go from I can figure out how to treat you well because you'll treat me well. And we've got a real small group of people. And so it's real easy to keep track of that. But then as we get a slightly bigger group, we have to decide as a group how it is that we're going to behave. And then we can hold people responsible for whether or not they stick within those guidelines. But then as we move to a broader society where I'm seeing tons and tons of people that I don't see on a regular basis. I mean, don't think about Denver or New York right now, New York City right now. Think about, Athens 2,500 years ago. I mean, like, you can't keep track of all these people. So what is now Mexico City, like when even the first time it was ridiculously populated, like you can't keep track of all those people. So what do we do? So at stage 3, we have this sort of intermediate level of mutual interpersonal expectations, relationships, and conformity, but that stops working at about 150 people. If your society is about 150 people or fewer, then you can keep track of all of this. Now, I want you to think about, only a few of you have your cameras on, so a lot of you are going to have to use chat for this. How many of you have more than 150 people in your social media network of choice? I'm raising my hand because I do. Right. I think I'm kind of trying to just spend way less time on. Okay, in chat, how many of you have? Okay, a bunch of folks are raising your hands as well. Awesome. I appreciate using that function. Right. So most of us do. Most of us will. If you use a social media network, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or Gab or whatever, right, you will have some nominal connection with more than 150 people real fast. And it's because, like my high school graduating class had 400 people. I'm friends with 100 of them on Facebook, right? Plus another couple dozen from the classes above and below me. My PhD program had my class alone had 16 people. And then you add in the 60 people who were there when I got there and the 60 people who came in the years before I left, but after my first year, right? And then, all my neighbors and former neighbors, I have a crazy extent. I probably have 150 people, just family, right? Like I have a weird, crazy, complicated family. How in the world am I going to keep track of all those people, even with Facebook? The answer is I'm not. I don't really know what's happening with those people. I really don't. I know what's going on with a much, much smaller set of people, and it's certainly less than 150 people. Now, if you took out having to care about Meghan Markle and Oprah Winfrey, you take out having to care about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you take out having to care about, all of the trappings of modern society, put yourself in a pre-modern society up to about 150 people. If it's only those 150 people you have to gossip about and keep track of, you can keep track of over 100 people, up to about 150. After that, you start losing track of people. You're not really sure, is this person an honest dealer? How about that person, right? Can I trust this person alone with my romantic partner? Oh, I can't. Okay, I'd better watch out, right? Like, so these sorts of abilities to gossip about and keep track of each other break down once societies get very big at all. So what do we need? We need unifying ideals. If we're going to have a society of any real size at all, then we need unifying ideals. And those unifying ideals get embodied in stories and rituals. And I want you to think about the stories and the rituals of even modern religions, because it really clarifies how even when you've got all these other competing things, all these other things competing for your time, if among a believer, among people who actually are part of a faith, the power of those stories and ideals is and rituals is really hard to overstate. Think about when you walk into a Catholic church. At the very front, a lot of Protestant churches don't do this, but Catholic churches tend to. At the very front of the church, a lot of times, what do you see? Right? A physical person, a sculpture of a physical person crucified up on a cross. That's a powerful story, right? God sacrificed his only son to cleanse you of sin. That's a powerful story. That's a powerful story. And then and forgive me, I'm going to focus in a lot on the Christian and even the Catholic specifically. I grew up Catholic stories just because that's what I know, and I don't want to. I mean, I don't know Jewish rituals and stories very well. I know even less about Islamic rituals and stories. So I'm not going to try to blaspheme or mess up anyone else's stories. I know these ones, so these are the ones I'm going to tell. Right? Think about communion. Right? Literally, I'm in the case of a Catholic church, literally, in a Protestant church, mostly metaphorically, but like I'm going to give you the body and blood of the Son of God, and you're going to take it into you and to further cement this relationship between you and Jesus, right? To make material that relationship. If you hear those stories over and over again, and you engage in those rituals over and over again, that's a tremendously powerful bonding glue for society that holds society together. And so that middle level of language and abstraction, we're back to the lion here, that middle level of language abstraction, like that's super helpful. That's really important, and we definitely need that. But it's not, society is not going to get big enough to do anything very interesting until we get up to where we have rituals and stories that can bring us together around a unifying set of ideals that make us predictable to one another. To bring us around unifying ideals that make us predictable to one another. Because otherwise it's not going to go well. I mean, like you're never going to, even in a modern society where, we could just hire more police. Like you'll never hire enough police if there isn't a broad agreement about how people are going to behave and a broad expectation, reliable, valid expectation that people are mostly going to behave that way. Right. I'm sure my neighbors leave their doors unlocked at various times. I could probably sneak in there and grab a bunch of their stuff and run out. Like, why? And not necessarily my neighbors, because like they sure as heck know who I am. But 8 blocks over, 3 miles over, I could just start trying doors and walking in people's houses and walk out with iPads. Like, why don't I do that? Well, it's because I buy into the stories and rituals that inform modern society, including, not limited to, but including the religious ones and the moral ones that have shaped my behavior and that have shaped your behavior. So where is this morality located? Well, our morality is located with our gods. And I don't just mean gods in a literal sense. I mean gods in a literal or a metaphorical sense, which brings us to Neil Gaiman and his book, American Gods. Also one of the most important books of the 21st century. A fantastic book. I recommend both of these. I recommend Sapiens. I recommend American Gods, the book. It's a longer read. It's got some graphic sex and violence in it. So if that's not your thing, don't read it. And the show makes the book look kind of tame in terms of graphic sex and violence because it really like shows it. But if that doesn't bother you, really good stuff, really thought-provoking stuff. And what Neil Gaiman talks about is a war between the old gods and the new. There's a war between the old gods and the new, and he goes in. He's actually an excellent archivist of various mythologies and religions. He's constantly telling really cool stories that are actually based in the actual stories that people used to tell each other in other places a really long time ago, or here a really long time ago before Europeans came. And he brings all of these, just almost as many as he feels like he can fit in, it seems like, old gods. There's somebody named Chernabog who like destroys people's heads as a kind of sacrifice. There's Bilquis, the Egyptian goddess of sex and sexuality. There's Anansi, the trickster spider. Just so many cool characters, but because they're all old gods in the old sense from the old world, they're all losing their power because fewer and fewer people worship them all the time. And what's taking over is the new gods. And he doesn't just mean Jesus and Allah, although those folks are doing fine as gods. He means the God of the New World Order, right? Which is the intersection of political and economic power in the world. It's the God of the media. It's the God of new technology, right? And for that he asks a really valid question, which is, where do you spend? Yeah, I'm a little behind on my clicking here. And so a simple question we could ask about applying this to modern life is, who is your God? But the more advanced question I want to ask is, where do you spend your worshipful attention? Where do you worship in the form of where you spend your attention, right? And for how many of us is this actually your God, right? I wake up in the morning and I pray to this God. I pray to this God before I go to sleep at night. I pray to this God throughout the day. Right. And for those of you who are very deep believers, please forgive just a little bit of blasphemy. But I mean that in a metaphorical sense. But I mean it literally in the sense that this is our source. That's got to be kind of trippy to be able to see a slightly reflected version of yourself there. Sorry about that. I'll show you the backside. Right. This is where we spend our worshipful attention. So much of where we spend our worshipful attention. And so wherever you do that, whatever stories you're telling yourself, and being told just over and over and over again, like that's in important ways, that's your God, or that's one of your gods. So so you should always be asking about wherever you're spending your worship, what are that God's implicit cultural and historical roots? What are that God's implicit historical and cultural roots? Right? Can we trust Mark Zuckerberg's moral compass? I'm not real comfortable, right? But that's still the church where we all worship, right? How about Jack Dorsey? Slightly better leader, still like I'm not sure, right? That Jack Dorsey should be the high priest of our culture. Right. So what are the historical and cultural roots? And I don't mean that merely to say like no one person should have that much power over that much communication power, because I do mean that. But I mean literally Mark Zuckerberg, literally Jack Dorsey. Do they have the historical and cultural background that I would choose, that you would choose? I would prefer someone who with a little bit more of a who didn't have it so well to be at the head of that. Right, somebody who had faced some more challenges, somebody who had a little bit more of an understanding of what it means to be sexually harassed, what it means to be assaulted, right? What it means to be discriminated against in the workplace. They don't understand that stuff, and yet there are high priests for that stuff. Is that okay? Is that something we want? So when we think about our the locus of morality. It's not just sort of that the new gods are winning and the old gods are losing, although that is an important part of the story. It's also, where do these old gods come from? And I really like, and so this is more from the show than it is from the book. In the book, Jesus it actually only shows up in an appendix. I think there's a good reason for that. But in the show, Jesus actually makes an appearance, and it's in the form of being part of the Easter ceremony, or Esther. And so Esther is one of the old gods, the pagan goddess of fertility and spring and rejuvenation, played here by Kristen Chenoweth, the only woman in the shot, the woman in the brightly colored dress. And then this chap here is in this chap here are the other characters in the show. They're not part of the Easter ritual. But think about Easter as a fusing, and we'll talk about whether there are like 12 Jesuses in the shot in a sec. But think about the fusing between Esther and Christianity, and the way that Christianity sort of took that holiday the same way they took the winter solstice and made Christmas out of it. They took the birth of spring and made it into the rebirth of Jesus, and so that Jesus then could become the metaphor who adopts and takes all of this rebirth and worship of spring that Esther previously represented. I think it's a devilishly clever trick. Pardon the me saying it that way. But I think it's a tremendously clever trick, and it's very effective. And so now when we think about spring, we're like, oh man, it's almost Easter. We start thinking about flowers coming up. We think about tulips popping out. I just had a woman stop me on my walk. I'm like literally power walking before class today, like with weights and stuff, trying to like get as much exercise in it. And she's like, oh look, the crocuses are coming up. I'm like, thanks, man. That's clearly what I want to talk about. But literally, she's so excited she just had to tell the only other person she saw, like, oh my God, spring is here, right? And so like the fusing of the traditions is so important that we still carry in some ways some of that pagan tradition with us, because that's the cultural and historical root of that part of our collective worship. And even if you're a secular humanist, if you're a mainstream atheist even, but if you're a mainstream sort of center of American culture type person, Easter is still kind of has like that special feeling to it, because it's like the birth of spring and the coming up of flowers and all of the beginning of the growing season. So now here's where they get a little bit more. I've stepped on some little toes. I'm going to put a foot squarely on a couple folks' big toes here. Please forgive me as I do it, because I think it's worth doing. Everyone except him, her, and him in the shot is Jesus. Right. So why would they do that? Why would they have all of these Jesuses here? And it's because Jesus is such a malleable concept that Jesus come to mean a whole bunch of different things to a whole bunch of different people, right? So we have sort of like, maybe like you might say like standard issue, European Jesus. And maybe over here we have sort of like American sort of a non-denominational, feel good, connect with the teens Jesus. And, over here we have, more sort of like poverty, effete, intellectual Jesus. Jesus is in Asia, and so Jesus is often represented as Asian. He's in Africa, is often represented as African, right? Hispanic Jesus is a really important. So we have all these different versions of Jesus, right? There's prosperity Jesus, right? And that's I think it's mostly much more of an American thing. But think about the churches for which the prosperity gospel is actually a really important animating force of, like, if I pray, if I worship, if I do the right things, Jesus will make me rich, not in the next life, but in this life. Like, take me from a 2-bedroom to a 6-bedroom house. Take me from 1 car to 3 cars. Like, Jesus will help me do that. That's a really important understanding of American Jesus, right? So, which is not everyone's Jesus, but so I argue that this, and not just literally the gods, but that God or God-like highest level of abstraction, something that you can't put your thumb on, you can't put your finger on, you couldn't paint it literally. I mean, you can paint it figuratively, as all of Renaissance art was trying to do, but you can't, that highest level of abstraction that's abstract beyond the physical. That's where morality lives, and because religion lives there, that's most of where we either directly or indirectly, that's mostly where we get our moral understanding. And it comes out in ways that are really really powerful in shaping us. And if you look at the combination of either my religion or my family upbringing, you'll tend to get one of two gods for most people. In, again, I'm speaking for America, like center, mainstream American culture. Although I think that this dichotomy probably holds across most races in America. I'm less confident about speaking about cultures that are not multi-generational American, at least. And George Lakoff captures this in the book Don't Think of an Elephant. Now, Lakoff is a leftist. He's a strategic leftist. I don't want you to read this because I'm telling you to read leftist tomes. I want you to read this because it's a really excellent insight into the political ideology that informs American culture. And he's very honest about the appeal and draw of both sides. And I think he's just really insightful that way. So I think it's a very quick read. If you're looking for some stuff to keep your brain fresh over the summer, consider putting this on your pile. George Lakoff, Don't Think of an Elephant. It's a bit old. You can probably find used copies for $0.05. But the most important takeaway, I'll tell you, the most important thing in this book is that we have two gods, two understandings of God in this culture. And you probably have one or the other, and it's very highly correlated with your political ideology. And I'm not even going to tell you which side of the political aisle is correlated with which, because you're just going to know. One is the stern father, and the other is the gentle parent. Right? The stern father, right? Who is loving, cares, wants you to do well. But if you mess up, man, you are going to hear about it. You're going to be told in no uncertain terms, you're going to be punished. The stern, lay down the law, very masculine view of God. And then on the other side, you have folks who have a not especially gendered leader who's very gentle, patient to a fault, loving to a fault, kind to a fault. Right? Which no matter what has happened up to this point, okay, fine, let bygones be bygones. Here's how we should proceed going forward. Here's the best thing for all of you going forward. Of course, this isn't a class about political communication. It's not a class about political ideology. I bring this up because everybody who walks into a workplace is probably going to have a pretty strong affiliation with one of these two as their understanding of a supervisor, as their understanding of a boss, as their understanding of a CEO. Should that person be a stern father or a gentle parent? Now, if you are in a company that has one and you have the other, you got to figure that out. You got to figure that out. You got to figure out how to speak the other language, or you got to look for another place to work that speaks your language. Right. But think about a lot of the mismatches that you will see in a workplace between an employee and employer is because of a mismatch of sort of how you view somebody in charge. Is it masculinized and stern, or is it not particularly gendered and more gentle and patient? You'll be unsurprised to hear that universities tend to be more of a gentle parent governing philosophy. That tends to be much more of the norm here. But even within universities, you'll often find variation. So within a College of Arts and or Sciences, right, especially if it's a College of Arts that doesn't have the College of Sciences attached to it, whoever's the dean of that is generally going to be a gentle parent, right? But sometimes even within a university, which overall has a sort of more gentle parent kind of ideology, College of Business sometimes will have more of a stern father kind of paradigm. Right, because business is masculinized, business is about consequences, business is about performance, right? Whereas everything else is about exploration and discovery and knowledge and unity and cohesion, right? So I've seen a lot of this across but mostly gentle parent in my work life. But I worked a lot of the same jobs a lot of you have in food service in particular, and I saw a lot of stern father type leaders there as well. And if you respond well to that, great, that can work really well for you. Or if you can just recognize it and say, oh, that's not my deal, but okay, I get it, and just not screw up and do well and perform and deliver, and then everything will be okay. Even if it's a little bit uncomfortable. But if you have a real mismatch there, that can be a real problem. And it can also shape the discussion about how human resources should proceed, how hiring should proceed, how policies should proceed, what strategies you should choose at the office, et cetera. So I don't bring this up to talk about the political connotation, but because everyone that you work with is probably going to bring one of these two gods with them to work. Whether they're Jewish or Hindu or atheist, right? They're Christian. They're probably going to bring one of these two gods and not the other one with them to work. And so that's worth looking out for, I think. This is one you don't want to get to leave in the hallway for people to trip over. So what are some of the common theories of morality? I didn't leave a whole lot of time for this because the book mostly covers that, but I want to run over them just to make sure that we're all all on the same page about it, because I think they're all worth knowing. Right. So one area, broadly speaking, is teleology or telos. A telos is an end. So a focus on the end or evaluating on the ends versus the means, right? The ends justify the means. That means teleology. Which holds that acts are morally right or acceptable if they produce some desired result, such as realization of self-interest or utility. So any moral philosophy that's focused on outcomes is a teleology. Egoism, as defined by the book, and I think this is a good one, defines right or acceptable actions as those that maximize a particular person's self-interest as defined by the individual. Enlightened egoism, however, takes a longer range perspective and allows for the well-being of others, although their self-interest remains paramount. And mainstream Fortune 500 corporate culture assumes enlightened egoism for everyone involved in the company, but in particular for the C-suite and the CEO. Right. So they're constantly tying CEO performance to the performance of the company. And they can say, well, we want to tie it to, performance 5 years from now or performance this quarter. And that, that's what you're going to get. If you want quarter by quarter, I'm only interested in the next quarter, and somebody who's only focused in doing the next, keeping the fastest turnaround on revenue possible, then you structure the incentives to be quarter by quarter. If you want a more visionary CEO is going to keep an eye on the long term, say, this stock, you can't cash this stock in for 5 years. So you have to make sure that this company is still standing 5 years from now. However you structure it, that's what you're going to get. If you want diversity and inclusion in this company, you got to bake that into the C-suite's incentives. You can't just say, oh, we value diversity and inclusion, but only pay people based on financial performance. If you actually value diversity and inclusion, you got to pay people for it. You can't just say we want environmental responsibility, but only pay people for quarterly results. Right? You got to pay if you want environmental responsibility, you got to measure and then structure C-suite pay around environmental sustainability. So I'm not too terribly opposed to the idea of enlightened egoism in the workplace, as long as it's used for good ends, toward good ends. Now, there's a broader moral philosophy under teleology that we would call utilitarianism, and that defines right or acceptable actions as those that maximize total utility or the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This is associated with John Stuart Mill. Now, we might say, we might modify that a little bit and look for rule utilitarianism, which is we look for behavior on the basis of principles or rules designed to promote the greatest utility rather than on individual examinations of each situation they encounter. Right. So think about it. If you're going to, for those of you who are accounting majors, I pick on accounting throughout this lecture. I think it's fascinating. I don't know anything about it, but I think it's fascinating. Not nothing, but I'm not an accountant. But imagine trying with every calculation you make as an accountant, trying to figure out how will this calculation, doing it honestly or dishonestly, how will that affect everyone that is going to affect? That will make your job undoable. That will make your job undoable. You can't proceed through life that way and expect that to go well. You're going to have trouble figuring out exactly how you should proceed. So instead, well, if I follow the generally acceptable accounting practices and and follow the policies of my company, I'm forthcoming with everyone. Anytime there's any ambiguity, I'm 100% forthcoming about it with everyone involved. I try to make sure any ambiguity or uncertainty is structured into all of the reports that get sent out to the public. Right? We can come up with a list of rules that are the best for everyone involved, and then try and follow those rules. We could also use utilitarianism as a way to evaluate whether we have the right rules or whether we need different rules. To come back to the taking a pen from work versus taking 10 cents out of the petty cash drawer topic, right? I think there's a pretty good case to be made that an office should just write off a certain number of small office supplies every year, because on the expectation that employees will either accidentally take them home. In the case of pens, I mean, it's super easy to do, or they'll take them home because it's not worth buying a whole bunch of them. Like imagine like you don't have a kid at home, and how much printing do you have to do? Right. So like, oh man, I've got to print this one form to take the DMV, or I'll have to stand in line for an extra half hour and I'll miss more work that way. So if I take, and I don't have time to stop at the store and buy a ream of printer paper. And so I'm going to take 2 sheets of paper home with me, and carefully tucked in a manila folder so that I don't get wrinkled. And then I can print my form at home, and then I can take that to the DMV and I can be back at work faster. Right. So it's sort of a rule that minor theft, and I mean theft, not quote marks, scare quotes, right? Minor theft of office supplies is okay because it's the net cost of the company is really small compared to the cost of mental bandwidth and time for employees in sticking to the absolute letter of the law for all of those things. It's just not worth enforcing. And so does that make everyone better off, including the company? Probably up to a point. I mean, like if people are taking the printer home, then you got problems. If people are taking whole reams of paper home, then you got problems. But the minor disappearing of office supplies is something we as a company officially just do not care about. Like I wouldn't put it in writing, right? Because then it's like, well, what counts as minor? But at least that's the norm or an expectation. I think that would be a sensible rule that doesn't meet the next moral standards we're going to be talking about. We can also look at act utilitarianism, which examines specific actions rather than the general rules governing them to assess whether they will result in the greatest utility. So that's more what I was talking about when, like, imagine you're an accountant who's looking at every calculation and think about, how about this? If I'm honest here, how does that affect people? And then your next calculation. Okay, if I'm honest here, how does that affect people? And then your next, like, go through your day that way. I dare you. You'll go insane. Right. So I don't think act utilitarianism is a useful philosophy in that way. Now, some of the bigger ones, some of the much bigger decisions, that's should I sell the company to the employees, or should I sell it to the highest bidder? I don't know that we need a rule for that, because how often do you sell a company? Right. But it's will it make it better? Will it make the world better to sell it to the employees or sell it to the highest bidder? Like that might be one case where breaking out act utilitarianism makes a little bit more sense. So up next we have deontology, which is focuses on the preservation of individual rights and on the intentions associated with a particular behavior rather than its consequences. Regards certain behaviors as inherently right, and that's as defined by your own moral guidelines or your own cultural guidelines, or the extraterrestrial, by which they mean God, not ET. Non-consequentialism is a system of ethics based on respect for persons, which is, in other words, it's another way to think about deontology, that you're not, I'm going to treat you in a certain way, not because it's good for you or because it's good for me, but because you're a person and you deserve a certain level of respect. I should respect your property. I should respect your time. I should respect you enough to speak to you honestly. And the categorical imperative is act as if the maximum of that action were to become thy will, by thy will, a universal law of nature. In other words, only do things that you would be comfortable with absolutely everyone doing. In one way, this is really silly. In one way, this is silly. I mean, I don't want everyone to be a professor. I want most of you not to become professors. If you want to become a professor, come talk to me. I'll tell you all about it. But I want most of you not to become professors, because I want accountants and engineers and computer scientists and managers and people who come up with clever marketing jingles, right? We need all of those things. So okay, well, fine. That's silly. Obviously not. So that's not the category. But how do we, well, don't steal office supplies. Don't steal office supplies, even if I accidentally take a pen home in my jacket before I realize it. Does that count? Okay, well, don't steal office supplies deliberately. Okay, well, now we're starting, and so you could start to get it down to where you have a little bit of a a little bit of clarity, a little bit of workability around these rules, but it's going to be hard to do. Developing a set of rules that you can live by generally is going to be really difficult to do. And so again, as with ACT utilitarianism, I think the categorical imperative is only really useful when you've got to bring out some big moral guns because you've got a big decision to make. And what we've been talking about is rule deontologists, which believe that conformity to general moral principles based on logic determines ethicalness. This is all associated with a gentleman named Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T. In contrast, act deontologists are looking at each action as the proper basis of actions are the proper basis to judge morality or ethicalness, and requires a person to use equity, fairness, and impartiality when making and enforcing decisions. So it's not that we're going to be able to come up. I think act deontology is probably a little bit more realistic because we're not going to be able to come up with a whole list of rules that'll govern everything. Like, good luck with that. But instead, you're going to look at each action and say, okay, what would be the equitable, fair, impartial side of this? And if you got a clear answer, then you've got a clear answer. And if you don't, okay, well, what sort of rules more broadly might we bring in here? Could help clarify that, but you look at each act more based on these broader principles that they're all sort of really based in the respect for your fellow humans. Anyway, so teleology versus deontology, utilitarianism versus the categorical imperative, brings us to the trolley problem. Anybody know the trolley problem? Anybody?
Yes.
Yes, Clayton, what's the trolley problem?
You're at a switch for a trolley car, and if you don't do anything, it's going to kill a bunch of people, but if you flip the switch, it'll only kill one person. And I think sometimes it's supposed to be the baby, your baby. I think that's a different version of it, but yeah, they make it your child as the one single person versus killing multiple people.
Sure. They do. They have a whole bunch of different versions of the trolley problem. And what this does is it can suss out sort of intuitive ethical thoughts about people, right? How people would, and people come up with different sides on this, right? So would you let the switch stay as it is, but then there's no blood on your hands, even if more people die? Or would you flip the switch such that by your hand, then this one person dies, but you are responsible? So if you were a deontologist, if you engage in the categorical imperative, then so I just watched Avengers Infinity War last night. We watched WandaVision, and I finally convinced my girlfriend to start watching some of the MCU with me. It's been great. They say, several of the characters throughout the movie say, we don't trade lives. I don't sacrifice one life for 5 lives. That's a categorical imperative kind of paradigm. That's deontology at work, right? Or you say, well, if I hate to sacrifice this one person, and also maybe drive myself insane because then I'm going to know I killed this one person in the trolley because of the trolley, but I saved these 5 people, and so 2 people, me and this person are worth less than these 5 people, so I'll save these 5 people's lives. That's teleology. That's utilitarianism. There are a lot of different ways you can structure it. It's not just this way. I don't think there's one good answer. It's like a clarifying mental exercise. And as you structure it different ways, I think it sets up different ways to it helps you answer even yet other questions. There's a whole body of literature that looks at this stuff. One of my favorites, though, was just a joke that my son sent me, and it said, okay, trolley problem. If you leave the switch as it is, it kills 2 people. If you flip the switch, it kills 5 people, but it does a jump. Anyway, so clearly it's you can take it to absurdity as well. Anyway, so virtue ethics, yet another paradigm. This is very much more associated with Aristotle. What is moral in a given situation is not only what conventional morality requires, but what a person with a good moral character deems appropriate. So this in many ways is a more explicit statement of the how am I going to be able to sleep with myself tonight kind of question. And a virtue ethics approach to business asks, would say things like good corporate ethics programs encourage individual virtue and integrity. I think this is absolutely right. I think this is absolutely right. By the employee's role in the community or organization, these virtues form a good person. An individual's ultimate purpose is to serve society's demands and the public good and be rewarded in his or her career. By the way, this is a good opportunity for a very brief but important corrective. The purpose of a company is not to make a profit. The purpose of a company is to deliver goods or services that are in demand in the marketplace. The purpose of a company is to deliver goods or services that are in demand in the marketplace. And the reward for living up to that purpose is profit. The reward for living up to that purpose is profit. So when you got in life, remember the purpose of business is business, which is not the end result. It's the process. It's to deliver goods and services that people actually want. And if you're part of that in a high integrity way, you're gonna be rewarded in your career, but you're also gonna feel like you're a good person. And the well-being of the community goes hand in hand with individual excellence. The best embodiment of the virtue ethics approach to business is probably the Daniels Fund. I could tell you all about that, but for those of you who've heard of that, that's a good example of this. Finally, I want to talk about justice theories. Justice is the fair treatment and due reward in accordance with ethical or legal standards, including the disposition to deal with perceived injustices of others. It's based on the perceived rights of individuals and on the intentions of the people involved in a business interaction. It evaluates ethicalness based on fairness. And there are several types of justice. There's only one that I really want to make time to get to today. And it's the one we're going to have time to get to. And that's distributive justice, which is based on the evaluation of outcomes or results of the business relationship. And the area of emphasis is the benefits derived and equity and rewards. And I think this is super fascinating when we bring in John Rawls and look at his veil of ignorance. Now, I want you to imagine yourself in something called the original position. You don't know, you're trying to decide how to design a society or how to decide how a business is going to behave even, but you don't know whether you're the CEO or the custodian or the customer or a member of the community. Or in the society's sake, you don't know whether you're going to be rich or poor, old or young, black, white, Hispanic, right? You don't know what abilities or disabilities you're going to have. You don't know what gender you're going to have, et cetera. And so if we stand behind this veil of ignorance in this original position and pretend like we don't know where we actually stand, how would you design that company? How would you design that society? And the answer is, intuitively at least, is that we would design it such that we would provide the most benefit to those who are the least advantaged. We would provide the most benefit to those who are the least advantaged, right? Now, that's not to say you pay the custodian more than the CEO, because now the janitor, the custodian is the most advantaged, right? But we would constantly be looking for a way to, how can we pay our least paid members more, right? So this sort of Dan Price sort of paradigm is that, remember the CEO of the payments company that just gave everyone a minimum salary of $70,000. This is the kind of thinking that leads to something like that, which is I want everyone to be risen up together. So I don't know why Rawls isn't in this chapter. He's in an earlier chapter. I think it's chapter 4, but Rawls is also in the book. And so I think this is also worth knowing. Again, I will post information about the exam, ideally today, very probably today. Whatever I do, you'll have a week plus the rest of whatever day I post it to take it. It's open book, but make sure you read the instructions first before you open it, because you'll have one attempt to do it. It's not timed. Some of you may want some 4 hours to take it. It shouldn't take that long, about 60 to 90 minutes for most of you. And don't work with other people. Okay. Thanks so much. Have a good afternoon, and I'll see you all on Wednesday for the discussion.